Good day, everyone. My name is Ian van Vuren. This is the 25th of September 2024. The presentation I'm going to do today is about strategy. Now, where does this come from? I was asked by SAFA, the South African Air Force Association, when they had their annual Congress in May 2024 this year, to do a presentation on strategy as a guest speaker. Now, I thought it would be pretty boring to do a theoretical presentation on strategy. So I thought to make it more practical by the end of some examples of select wars. So let's get to that to show you what I am talking about. So the topic of the presentation is military strategy implementation from Operation Blue Wildebeest to Swords of Iron, 1966 to 2024. Aim of the presentation is to provide an overview of strategy implementation in select wars, and in order to address that aim, we will take a look at topics like what is strategy, just briefly, because we can spend the whole day on that. What is doctrine, and then the examples that I spoke of, the war in Angola, the war in Mozambique against ISIS, and the war in Gaza. So, moving along swiftly. What is strategy? Now, the word strategy is derived from the ancient Greek term strategos, which means art of the general. And that gives you an indication that initially the term had a military application, and that was the case for centuries. But later on, it got used by all other disciplines and business environment, especially in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Business strategy started developing with a number of people like Taylor and many others who started developing concepts for productivity improvement and so on. I also facilitated dozens of business strategy sessions for clients locally and abroad in the Middle East when I lived there. And there are many frameworks or models that are used. Method framework, Balanced Scorecard by Kaplan and Norton, Blue Ocean Strategy by Professors Kim and Mabon, many others. But at the end of the day, I'll get to that just now. Then there's also, of course, defense strategy or military strategy. Now, I was part of this military strategy development process in the SADF and the SANDF when I was there. And in fact, in 1997, my last year in the outfit, I presented the Defense Forces strategy to the Joint Standing Committee on Defense, a Parliamentary Committee on Defense. Tony Ngeni was still the chair then. That turned out to be an unmitigated disaster, but that's a topic for another day. But reduced to its essence, doesn't matter whether it's military strategy or business strategy or strategy in any way. Reduced to its essence, strategy consists of three things. Ends, what are the objectives that you are trying to achieve? Ways, in the military terms, so ways, how you're going to do it, your concepts of operations, if you wish. And the means, what resources do you require to implement the ways to achieve your objectives. Your capabilities that you need, ends, ways, and means. And I'm going to be referring to this a number of times in this presentation. Then briefly, what is doctrine? Now, doctrine also rests on three legs, but these three legs or three aspects of doctrine interact with each other in an iterative way, and it consists of theory, experience, and technology. Now, let me illustrate the concept by means of air power doctrine. Centuries ago, there was a theory that manned flight should be possible from the days of Da Vinci and perhaps even before him. But it's only when technology had caught up in 1903, the Wright brothers made manned flight possible at a little place called Kitty Hawk in the US. Since then, there was a lot of experience obtained, especially in World War I, that led to the refining of the theory. A new technology came to the fore. So after World War I, you had great strategy theorists on air power like Dewey and Billy Mitchell, who were thinking about strategic bombardments and how that could become useful in future wars. And that actually found its way, as far as experience is concerned, of course, in World War II, with a strategic bombardment campaign by the Allies, using bombers like B-17s, B-29s, Lancasters, and others. And I suppose after the war, at some stage, in the late 40s or 50s perhaps, some clever chap sat in the crew room and said, you know what, don't you think it should be possible to develop an aircraft that can't be seen by radar? And so the concept of stealth was born, which manifested in, for instance, the SR-71 Blackbird. Now, that wasn't really a stealthy aircraft, but there were some of the technologies that were already embedded in it. And then afterwards, the F-117 Nighthawk and the B-2 and the B-21 Raider bombers. And then, of course, we see the development of the fifth gen fighters, as they are referred to. In America, the F-22 and the F-35, the Chinese J-20, and the Russian Sukhoi Su-57. And I see the Turks and the Indians are also climbing onto the fifth gen bandwagon now, with plans to develop their own fifth gen fighters. So that's just an illustration of how a doctrine works. A doctrine you can describe as best practice. It's the best way of doing something. But this is a very important concept to understand. Strategy and doctrine are two sides of the same coin. So whereas strategy says how things should be done, or rather doctrine says how things should be done, strategy says how it will be done, because there are always limitations on employing pure doctrine, normally of a financial nature. And we've seen it in our environment as well. When I was still in the Defense Force, there were great defense reviews written. I think the last one was 2015. It's a brilliant document. But that document, which can loosely be seen as a type of doctrine, will never be implemented as it stands, because there just isn't money. Okay, let's move on swiftly. Now, firstly, Southern Angola. I'm going to focus primarily on the period 1985 to 1988, but I need to speak about the years before that as well, just to give a bit of context. Incidentally, that photo over there that you see is 310 Air Force Command Post in Oshikati, where I was stationed for 4 years. Yours truly standing in the middle of the back there. Some of our comrades are, unfortunately, that are on that picture are not with us anymore. Okay, so Operation Blue Wildebeest was Angola, 26 August 1966, when the combined police, defense and air component attacked the SWAPO camp in northwestern Uvambuland at the place called Angola, and that really started the war against SWAPO. Then we find the Portuguese here. So in the 70s, early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, we were involved supporting the Portuguese against the Agostinho Neto's MPLA, Holden Roberto's FNLA, and Jonas Savimbi's UNITA. At the end of the day, we know that the MPLA won out. They became the de facto government, and they still are today. Then the next big Defense Force incursion into Angola was Operation, we also of course had Operation Savannah in 1975, which brought us to the outskirts of Rwanda. After Savannah, the next big operation into Angola was Operation Reindeer, when we attacked 2 SWAPO bases at Kasinga and Chetaquera, codenames Moscow and Vietnam respectively. It was a successful operation, and the first time we used airborne paratroops on a large scale since the Second World War. Now, after that, things started escalating, because I'm just highlighting some of the big operations here, but there were dozens and dozens of other smaller operations. In 1981, we found Operation Protea, where we, for the first time, had big contacts with Angolan FAPLA, the Angolan Armed Forces Brigades. In 1983-84, Operation Askari, similar type of thing. Then other operations as well. In 1985, Operation World Mesh, where we did attacks on, from 85 to 87, FAPLA had this thing that during the rainy season of all times, that they tried to advance from Menonga and Kutikonavol to in southeastern Angola to attack Jamba, UNITA's headquarters. It was never a good idea, so We gave the support in Operation Wildmesh to UNITA against that incursion. And then, of course, the big one, Operation Modular Rupert Packer, in 1987 and 88. But what was the result of all of these operations? I mean, as I said, I'm just scratched the surface here. There are many other operations, lots of Space Forces operations, like, for instance, blowing up the railway line between Lubango and Namibia on the coast that drove the Angolans and the Cubans completely crazy. So, to a certain extent, I suppose you could say we escalated this war as well. So there was an iron curtain that descended on that part of the world. Let me illustrate that concept to you. And what many people don't know is that southern Angola was the most heavily defended piece of real estate from an air defense point of view in the world in the mid to late 80s, outside of the Iron Curtain, outside of the old Soviet bloc. Because, for instance, let's just look at the radar cover here. And you had these radar battalions, and I just mentioned the types there. That radar battalion consisted of, and a radar company. The main difference was that the radar battalion had the P-35 or the P-37 ground control intercept bar-lock radar, which meant they could direct their fighters to intercept aircraft. And we just had a lonely radar down at Ondangwa and at Rundu. So the effect of that is, and I can't remember what the altitude was that I flew those ranges at, it's probably about 20,000 feet or something. The effect of that was that we tended to operate, and I'll just give an indication of distances there as well. We had to operate mostly in red or at best purple radar, where the two opponents' radars overlap, whereas the opposition could operate in blue radar, in friendly radar. So they could operate with impunity at virtually every altitude they wanted to do. Okay, let's take a look at the try and draw this down. Okay, so there's 6 radar battalions in southern Angola and 2 radar companies. SAM, surface-to-air missiles. Now, there were 3 SAM-2 guideline battalions. So SAM-2 was a massive missile, the left pictured at the top. 2.5 tons, 2.5 tons, 11.2 meters long, effective slant range 45 kilometers, altitude 85,000 feet, fan song fire control radar. Next to it, the SAM-3 GOA, 6.7, 6.2 meters, depending on the model. The length 1.5 tons, effective slant range 27 kilometers, altitude 60,000 feet. Then below that, left is the SAM-6 Gainful, about 24 kilometer slant range. Then next to that, the SAM-9 Gaskin, infrared system that had at least 11 batteries of those, at least 11 SAM-13 Gopher batteries beneath the SAM-9, and then at the bottom left we have the SAM-8 Gecko batteries, of which they had at least 4 of those batteries, probably more. We captured one of those towards the end of 1987 in Operation Modular Rupert in southeastern Angola. Then, of course, there were hundreds of SAM-14, 7, SAM-16 man pads. The 14 and the 16 especially had a full front sector capability, so they could engage you head on, unlike the old SA-7 that had to have a lock on from the back on the exhaust of a aircraft. So I incidentally was the first Westerner to bring out the SAM-16 that was captured in southern Angola that we could lay our hands on. There's a whole story about that as well. Then, as far as AAA is concerned, we had the 12.7 mils, we had the 14.5, 3 types of 14.5s, 1 barrel, 2 barrels, 4 barrels, the 20 mil M55, which is a Czechoslovakia thing, 23 mils ZU-23, which I still consider to be one of the best pieces of anti-aircraft artillery ever made, together with the 88 mil flak gun from the Germans in the Second World War, and then the ZSU-23 for Shilka, with the 4-barrel Shilka with the Gundish J-band radar mounted on a PT-76 chassis. Now, it's interestingly enough, we never encountered the Chilkas in combat. They were definitely there. I saw a battery aerial photography on a little place called Jamba, not Unitas Jamba. Jamba, if you take the road from Onjiva, Ivali, Jamutet, up north, just beneath the railway line, there was a little place called Jamba, and there was a battery of them. Now, I have a theory about that. You know, the Chilkas are mounted on a PT-76 amphibious tank chassis. The PT-76, Poplar had some of them, we captured some of them, was designed for European conditions, not the bush of southern, especially southeastern Angola. And I don't think it was capable of traversing or landing that bush. All right, then you had the one barrel 37 mil and then the 57 mil. So one barrel and the two barrel. And then the aircraft you can see there. So why I'm showing you this in terms of especially the SAMs, the AAA and the radars, if you talk about an integrated overlapping air defense capability, this is what they had. That was typical Soviet doctrine of the era. Everything from ground zero up to 85,000 feet and up to 45 kilometers in distance. So there was always an overlap, different systems that would cover any enemy incursions into the airspace. This is the type of thing that we came up against as an Air Force. Okay, so I spoke about that. Now, what are the strategy implications of facing this type of enemy? What were the ends that we wanted to achieve? Now, Brigadier General Dick Lord, he was a senior officer at Air Force Command Post towards the end, always spoke of the so-called yo-yo strategy that we had. Into Angola, out of Angola. Into Angola, out of Angola. But we didn't really know. Now, as far as the ends are concerned, so there was a situation of, let's call it strategic ambiguity. I mean, I'm pretty sure that we were all quite clear from the political level to the military level at the beginning of the war when we attacked Ngulumbash and other SWAPO camps, what the aim was. It is to eradicate SWAPO. After that, when we started engaging FAPLA more often, and then with the increased support to UNITA, direct fighting support and massive logistical support, it became vague. Was it fighting against FAPLA? Was it fighting against SWAPO? Was it supporting UNITA? Was it fighting against the Cubans, as happened later? What really were the ends that was it to stop the so-called Rooi-gevaar? Now, as I say, you know, hindsight is 20/20 vision. But if anybody really thought that 65,000 Cubans in Angola was going to cross the border, march through the whole of Namibia, and then come to a screeching halt at the banks of the Orange River, cross that, and then take over South Africa, perhaps that was a bit naive. But it was a different era, I suppose. So the ends, towards the end, strategic ambiguity set. Nobody really knew what was to be achieved. So if you use the ends, ways, and means test, so I spoke about the ends. Nobody was quite sure what it is. The ways, operational concepts, there we were superior to any opposition that we ever faced. I mean, South African soldiers were the best because of their training. And there's no doubt about that. The means, the capabilities, now this is where the problem arose, especially towards the end of the war. There was a capability mismatch. I mean, we were outgunned, outnumbered. Now, if I say outgunned, I'm talking air environment, because I know immediately the gunners will say, what the hell you're talking about? What about G5 and so on? It's not speaking air warfare dimension. And I suppose the final penny really dropped as far as this is concerned on the 27th of September 1987, when the Arthur PSC incident happened. Now, I'm not going to talk in detail about the incident. If you want to read more about it, you can Google Arthur PSC and see what happened there. But in essence, we engaged two Mirages, engaged two MiG-23s flown by Cuban pilots, and our missile that we had at the time was a rear sector infrared missile. So you had to maneuver to engage to get a firing solution from the back of the enemy aircraft. Their missiles that they had were AA-8 AFIT infrared front sector missile, short range, and an AA-7 Apex radar guided front sector missile, medium range, 25 to 35 kilometers. Now, immediately when I say this, I talk about front sector weapons versus having to engage from the rear only, you see there's a problem. There's a fundamental dichotomy in terms of how your tactics work, because this guy can shoot you from the front when you're coming towards him. You have to go around the back some way or another. And the MiG-23 just about a couple of occasions where they just actually outran our missiles. Even when the missiles were fired from the back, got locked on, they had superior acceleration capability. They out-accelerated the missiles that we had. Now, what happened with Arthur Pierce is that an AA effort was launched from the front, in the front sector mode, and it exploded next to his aircraft and cut his hydraulics, and then he had the accident when he landed back at Rundu Air Base. So this is when we started to realize this is now, I mean, we always knew that they had these missiles. I mean, they got the first MiG-23s in 1983 after we had shot down 81, 82, two of the MiG-21s, flown by the same pilot of ours, Arne Rankin. Both were gunshots though. So yes, this is now, everyone realized now this is a problem coming. So fortunately the war came to an end. So as far as strategy is concerned, the end's uncertainty towards the end, the way is great, means no, a problem. Just some last point on the ends. It is not necessary, and in fact not advisable, that the soldiers on the ground understand exactly what your strategy is. Because if they get caught, then, you know, they can reveal all. But at least they must understand what the common goal is, so that they can muster around it, they can rally around it. Even Sun Tzu, the Chinese philosopher general, said in about 450 BC, that everyone can see the tactics whereby I conquer, but nobody can see the strategy from which my victories are derived. So, and that probably sums it up pretty well. Okay, moving along. SAMMIM in Mozambique, South African military mission in Mozambique. Now, let's talk about the origins here. Let's talk about ISIS in general. ISIS, as most of us know, is an offspring of Al-Qaeda. Now, in 2004, al-Zarqawi, who was then in charge, established AQI, Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And then in 2013, al-Baghdadi, who had taken over by then, decided to move into Syria as well, and to form a partnership with the local group there called Jabhat al-Nusra. That, much to the chagrin of the then overall leader of Al-Qaeda, which was al-Zawahiri, and they basically expelled ISIS, and since then they've been at each other's throats. So that's the background, and then of course ISIS started to establish their so-called caliphate, their homeland, in parts of Syria and Iraq, which was then dismantled in the period 2014-2017 by, amongst others, the American Air Force. And it's always fascinated me, the logic behind the establishment of the caliphate, because the inherent strength of the terrorist organizations that relies on using guerrilla tactics is that by its very nature, it's hit and run, and then they disappear in the bush, which frustrates the government forces generally who have conventional weapons because they can't find something to shoot at. Now, when they established the caliphate, they had static schools, public service infrastructure, just like a normal country. And that, of course, gave the Americans and the others ample targets, and they bombed into to Kingdom Come. And that's how they dismantled it. Now, ISIS is still alive and well in that part of the world, make no mistake about it. As indicated by ISIS in the activities in the Khorasan province, as they call it, Afghanistan, and the bombings that they've executed in Mozambique, in Russia, in April this year, I think it was, and other attacks. So they're alive and kicking. Now, let's move closer to home. There are small ISIS groupings, some of them a bit dormant in Somalia, Libya, Algeria, and Tunisia. But the three main provinces, and ISIS divides the world into provinces, are ISWAP, ISIS Western African Province, which with activities that the operations that they conduct in Niger, Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, Mali, Burkina Faso. Then you have ISIS SP, ISIS Sinai Province, with activities mainly related to the Greater Egypt area. And then you have ISCAP, ISIS Central African Province, with activities focused on the DRC and then Mozambique. So ISIS-M is an element of them. Now, the leader of ISIS-M, well, that was in 2022. The attrition rate of ISIS leaders is quite high, so I don't know if he's still the leader. It's Abu Hassan. Now, there's a lot of debate still amongst academics whether ISIS is really ISIS and whether they are still the original al-Sunnah wa Jamal, al-Sunnah. I've got no doubt it is ISIS. Now, speaking of al-Sunnah, this is how the movement started. Cabo Delgado in the far north of Mozambique is known by the locals as Cabo Esquecido, meaning the Forgotten Cape. And that summarizes really how the organization started. It's pretty much the same situation as how Boko Haram started in Nigeria. So what happened there is that there was nothing going on in that province. It was completely forgotten for all practical purposes by the central government. So a local cleric came down from Tanzania at some stage in 2012, 2013, and he started mobilizing the youth, the largely unemployed youth, around a more, as they call it, a more pure strain. I call it a more radical strain of Islam called Salafism. And that then is the doctrine, the ideology preached by ISIS all over. Salafist, jihadist ideology. Preaching, promoting the more pure strain of Islam through fighting. And then it just developed from there on, and eventually the first attacks occurred in Mozambique, still al-Sunnah, in October 2018, and then about 2021, if memory serves me correctly, they swore allegiance to ISIS. And from then on, even before, you started seeing the ISIS flag disappearing. And wherever there were contacts or areas of operations, and al-Nusra, the official mouthpiece of ISIS, I mean, whenever a new leader is appointed ISIS at senior level, the provinces have to swear allegiance to this leader. They call it in Arabic bayah. There are videos made of this, and I saw the video of the ISIS group in Mozambique swearing bayah to the new leader of ISIS at the time. I don't know who it was. So I have little doubt in the fact that the flags are displayed. Incidentally, what is written on those flags is in Arabic, La ilaha illa. Let me try that again. La ilaha illa God, and then Allah Rasul Muhammad, meaning loosely translated, there is only one God, and that is Allah, and Muhammad is his only prophet. Well, let's move to Samam. Samam was deployed in Mozambique from middle July 2021 till 15 July this year. 3-year deployment. The mandate they had consisted of 3 objectives that had to be achieved. So the ends, strategy ends, to eliminate ISIS, secondly, to support Mozambican armed forces in their operations, and thirdly, to provide training support to the Mozambique armed forces. I can't really speak on the last 2, but as far as the first one is concerned, there was definitely no elimination of ISIS. They're alive and well. There have been attacks again since the beginning of this year, and since some of them has withdrawn. So they are alive and well, going strong still. So as far as the results are concerned, that is what happened. So the ends have not been achieved. And that has not been achieved because you cannot, and this I find very strange, because if you, I mean, most of the SADC countries are governed by ex-revolutionary forces who used guerrilla tactics and revolutionary tactics. So they better than anyone else should understand how ISIS minds works and how they should be countered. Yet they have not used the security space created by the Samam and Rwanda troops. Of course, a separate Rwandan deployment, apart from the Samam deployment. That's one of the problems. There's no interoperability. There was no interoperability between these two groupings. So they did not use it, because you cannot, they should know that you cannot defeat an ideology by means of military might alone. You can only defeat an ideology by presenting a better ideology, by presenting a better option for the people on the ground. And this they should have done. They should have used that security space that was created by Samam and the Rwandan troops to move in their boots and all, to build clinics, to build roads, everything, just to show the people that they care, create job opportunities and so on. Okay, enough about the Mozambique escapade. Let's take a look at Operation Swords of Iron, the Israeli operation into Gaza. Now, that's the type of picture that nobody wants to see in any war. And this is one of the reasons why Israelis are being accused all over the world of taking things too far. But one thing you have to say is that as far as the ends are concerned, Israelis have been sticking to their guns from the beginning till now. And I'm talking 25 September 2024. I don't know when this is going to end. Because from the beginning they said their objective is the complete annihilation of Hamas. Now remember, the ends in a strategy you can equate also to one of the first principles of war, selection and maintenance of the aim, and they've been brilliant with that. Now the problem comes with the ways and the means, how they've been going about that. That can be criticized, I suppose. But consider this. What is a doctrine? What is the best practice for fighting a war against a sophisticated force consisting of thousands of troops embedded in hundreds of kilometers of tunnels underneath the most densely populated place on earth? What is the best practice, the doctrine for fighting such an enemy? The short answer is none. It doesn't exist. The Jews are writing the book. They're writing the doctrine as they are moving along. And in the process, there's a lot of overreach, as we can see with photos like that. But also consider the fact that Hamas is perhaps the first military, paramilitary, call it what you want, organization in the world that deliberately wants its people, that it's so-called fighting for, to be killed. They're deliberately putting them in harm's way to be killed, so that they can exploit the propaganda value of that on the media, on social media. And that, from a strategic point of view, from their side, they've been succeeding brilliantly. If you look at all the protests all over the world against the Israeli occupation of Gaza. So, yeah, the last shot has not been fired in that war. I doubt very much whether it will soon be. I don't know what the solution is going to be, because now we see the problem starting with Hezbollah in Lebanon. That promises to be a much bigger challenge to the Israelis. But on the other hand, it's also not necessarily the case, because they have more specific isolated targets that they can target there, as they have already been doing. Okay, that's as far as Operation Swords of Iron is concerned. So let us conclude in terms of this presentation. Just a few main points. But I'm saying, if the ends are not clearly defined, communicated, and pursued ruthlessly, mission creep and gradualism set in. So selection and maintenance of the aim is crucial. We saw that happening with us in Namibia and specifically Angola. Incidentally, it's exactly what happened to the Americans in Vietnam as well. You could argue perhaps the same in Afghanistan and Iraq. On the other hand, Israelis have been sticking very ruthlessly to a specific aim that they've selected. In Mozambique, I don't really know what happened there, because I think it was a complete waste of time, if you ask me. Secondly, the forces on the ground do not need to understand the strategy, but they must know what the ends are to be achieved, as I also emphasized by means of the Sun Tzu example. If there is an ends and capabilities mismatch, you will lose the war no matter how good your ability to execute is. In other words, no matter how good your ability to execute the ways, operational concepts. In Angola, the air war at least, but I suppose the war in general, is a very good example of this. We just came to realize this is not going to work, at least not from an air war capability. Next point is that unity of effort is key. If all resources are not mobilized to this effect, strategic diffusion and strategic ambiguity sets in. Coordination of effort as well. And this is also one of the problems that Saham found themselves in. Because, for instance, there was no interoperability between them and the Rwandan forces. Not politically, neither as far as radio communications were concerned. They didn't have compatible radio communications, and neither party really wanted to communicate with each other. So it was a wasted effort. As far as I know, the Rwandans are still there, 3,000 to 4,000 of them. Second last point, a good military strategy is sustainable over time. Now, Angola was not sustainable over time. There were other political factors, of course, that kicked in, but make no mistake, we would have had to find a solution. Now, at the end of the day, the war ended, the Cubans withdrew, UNITA stopped being a factor, especially after Zabimbi was killed in, I think, 2003. And Namibia gained its independence and got a relatively stable government. So I suppose all's well that ends well there. It does make one wonder what all the sacrifices were for, but that's again a different story for a different debate. Mozambique, it's not sustainable. It's 3 years, they said all the time. If you think you're going to beat an insurgency force, an ideology, the one propagated by ISIS, in 3 years, it's I don't know who thought out these plans, these strategies, but it was naive, sadly. And then, of course, Gaza. We will see how sustainable this operation is going to turn out to be, especially when the war with Hezbollah starts warming up. And then the last point, that's probably one of the most important points that I'd like to leave here, is that military power alone cannot defeat an ideology, especially not a radical one like Salafi jihadism. Only an ideology, a better ideology, can defeat an ideology. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If you like it, please click like, subscribe if you want, and please share widely. Thank you very much.